It's time for Recipe of the Day. Here we are on the last Sunday of November, and if you like pork, chances are you're going to be roasting some at some point in the next month, right? And so today seems like a good day for me to tell you how to make a delicious homemade pork roast gravy. So first, what kind of pork roast is going to be best if you want delicious gravy? That is going to be a Boston butt or a pork shoulder roast. Either of those just gets lots of juices coming out of it, so you end up with lots of drippings in your pan, and that is where so much of the gravy flavor comes from. Having said that, if you're doing a pork loin, this method will work and you will get some nice pork flavor from the roast for the gravy if you follow my instructions. It's just not going to be quite as flavorful. And I'll say right off the bat that really one of my favorite things to do if I'm doing a pork loin and I want gravy is to make separately my recipe for gravy without drippings, which is a recipe that you can make ahead, that you can make anytime you want gravy, even if you don't have nice drippings from any kind of roast. And then what you would do is just add to it any drippings that you do get from that pork loin roast. So then you're developing a nice gravy flavor, nice and rich in that dripping free gravy recipe, and then just supplementing that with the little bit of drippings that you get. And I'm just going to pre-say something that when I talk about the drippings, I add liquid to the roasting pan as I'm roasting things, and the drippings from the roast fall into there. So when I'm talking about the drippings from the pork loin roast that you're going to add to your pre-made gravy, that is what I mean. You still do the liquid in the pan that I'm going to be telling you about, and that's just because you get so little drippings from that pork loin. You do not want them to burn and stick onto the bottom of the pan. You want them to fall into liquid where they will be safe. They will reduce and concentrate. They'll be lovely, but they're not going to be wasted or burnt on the bottom of your roasting pan. Okay, so I know I do talk about this a lot, how I like to have that liquid in the bottom of the roasting pan, and I'll tell you how this started for me. It was way back when I first started making roasts. I made a chicken roast of some kind, I believe, and there were leftovers and I left them for my parents. And afterwards, my mom was like, the gravy just had this little bit of a burnt flavor. I think your drippings burnt a little bit. And that's when I realized that, yes, she was right. There was dark brown in the bottom of the pan, and I'd poured broth into there and it had picked up that flavor, and it wasn't the best flavor. So that is when I started, maybe she told me to, or maybe I thought of it myself, I'm not sure, putting some unsalted chicken stock into the bottom of that roasting pan. You can buy it in cartons, unsalted chicken stock, or make your own, or you can just use water if you want to. I wouldn't use a broth, even a low sodium one. They tend to have a high salt content. And the reason for the no sodium or no salt is because this is just going to keep concentrating, right? It's in the bottom of the roasting pan while you're roasting your roast, whether you have a Boston butt, pork shoulder, or the pork loin, crown roast, whatever you're doing, that water is down in there, that liquid is down in there, and the water keeps evaporating from it, and you keep adding to it, and then it evaporates more, and then later when you're making your gravy, it's going to be simmering and evaporating more, and that just continues to concentrate the salt flavor. So when you are making gravy, my biggest piece of advice is to not add salt to the liquid at any point until the very end. And part of this is also because I do like to really season the outside of my roasts. As with some other ingredients and things I've told you about, my mom always says when you're adding salt, pepper, and garlic powder to a roast, you add more than you need and then twice as much again. And that is just because, especially with a big roast, you're only able to season the outside and the inside doesn't get the benefit of that seasoning. So when you bite into a slice of roast, you're just going to have the seasoning from the edges and they have to season all of it. But what that also means for the purpose of gravy making is that as those juices are dripping out of the pork roast, they're salty, right? So you don't want to be adding any extra salt until the end. Okay, so you are roasting your pork. I put mine either on a rack or I put some whole carrots and celery in the roasting pan and put it on top of there, and then a little bit of that stock or water in the bottom, just a quarter of an inch. And then as it's roasting, whatever recipe you're using, every now and then peek in there. And if it's reduced, you add a little bit more and you just kind of keep having it go up the sides, because as it's it's reducing and evaporating away, it kind of browns along the outside edges of the roasting pan, and that browning is really, really nice. And when you add more liquid and it goes up the sides, it dissolves that browning into the gravy, you see. But it's not burning because you keep adding that liquid, so it doesn't have a chance to burn, it just browns. Okay, so that is how you get good drippings. Essentially from there, when your roast is done, you take it out and then you pour those drippings out of your roasting pan, all that liquid, and you can add in some more broth at this point and then use a rubber spatula and really scrape the sides and bottom of that roasting pan to get all the good flavor out of there. I like to use a fat separator, which is kind of like a big measuring cup that has a spout that goes down to the very bottom and takes from the bottom. So you pour your drippings into there and the fat is going to rise to the top as it always does, but then the spout goes down to the bottom. So when you're pouring, the liquid comes from the bottom, not the fat, and you have the fat left at the top. I love this especially for making gravy because what I can do is scoop the fat off of the top, however much I need. I'm going to talk about that in a second, and use that to make my roux, the mixture of the flour and the fat. So I'm scraping that off the top and take as much as I want, and then the rest of that fat gets left behind because you're going to be pouring from the bottom of that jug where the fat juices or drippings are. Okay, so how much fat and how much drippings do you need? I typically try to make between 1/3 and 1/2 cup of gravy per person, and that is because I like a lot of gravy. I don't want anybody to have to not put as much as they'd like, and I do like having some leftover gravy, and I just told you the other day about things to do with leftover gravy. They're all delicious, so making too much is better than not enough, in my opinion. So if I want enough gravy for like 6 to 8 people, I'm going to want about 3 cups of gravy, and that essentially means that I need 3 cups of liquid. And for each cup of liquid, I'm going to need between 1 to 2 tablespoons of fat and 1 to 2 tablespoons of flour. And I'm not going to get into it here because it'll take too long. But when you go to the blog post for this recipe, you'll see that there are instructions for how to do this with cornstarch. If you want to do it with cornstarch instead, it's not just exactly the same thing, but use the cornstarch instead of the flour. That won't work. I will also link in the show notes to my recipe for cornstarch gravy. So if you want a gluten-free gravy, you've got that covered and you can do that. I'm just not going to talk about it now. So what I would do at this point is scoop out about 4 tablespoons of the fat and put that into a saucepan. And then I'm going to look and see how much liquid I have up to where the fat starts in my gravy separator. Or if you're using a measuring cup, you can be looking at it in the measuring cup. And if it's not 3 cups, then you're going to add more of that unsalted chicken stock to there. Note that you can actually add some white wine first to there, up to about 1/2 cup if you're making 3 cups of the gravy. So you would add the 1/2 cup of white wine to your measuring cup or fat separator, and then however much more of that unsalted chicken stock you need to get it up to the 3 cup point. Now, if you are not using a fat separator, you would then scoop out the rest of the fat from the top of your drippings. Just put it in a bowl. You might need it later, never know. And then you can use that liquid from there when you need it. And if you're using a fat separator, you don't have to scoop it away because we're going to pour from the bottom. Okay, so now you've got your 4 tablespoons of fat from the top of your drippings in a saucepan. If you didn't get 4 tablespoons of fat, which is definitely going to happen if you have that pork loin, sometimes happens from a roast pork, a pork butter shoulder if it was a smaller one, then you can use butter instead to make up that 4 tablespoons. You're going to warm that over a low heat just to melt it, and then you add 4 tablespoons of flour to that and you whisk it to make it nice and smooth. That's your roux. It's a paste made from flour and fat. Then I like to cook that for just a minute or 2. I don't want it really brown, just a little bit cooked, and then take it off of the heat. The reason that I don't like to brown it too much is that it stops its thickening power. Flour doesn't thicken as well if it's been cooked a lot. It will make the gravy browner and add a little nutty flavor, so that's good, but it doesn't thicken as well. If you are planning to cook your roux a little bit longer, if you want it to get kind of a nutty brown, then you're going to start with more flour at the beginning, okay? And more fat also. You want to have equal amounts of the fat and the flour. Okay, so after I've done cooking the roux for a minute or 2, take that saucepan off of the heat. It is easier to add your drippings, add your liquid to that if it's not cooking at the same time, because when the liquid hits the roux, it can start kind of cooking into clumps. You don't have to do this if you're an experienced gravy maker and you've done it a bunch of times and you can whisk fast enough while pouring and it's not a problem for you. Do it that way. But if you want to be safe and careful, take it off the heat, and then you're going to slowly drizzle in some drippings, like 1/4 cup while whisking, and you're keeping it smooth. Each time you add more, you're just going to keep keeping it smooth. If it's smooth at every step, then you don't have to worry about there being lumps, okay? At that point, I'm also going to add in some poultry seasoning, half a teaspoon. Poultry seasoning does not taste like poultry. It does not have any poultry ingredients in it. Instead, it is a mixture of dried herbs, dried thyme, dried sage, dried marjoram, dried oregano, dried rosemary, and a small amount of ginger. You can make your own, and I will put a link to it for you, or you can buy it. And you put a half a teaspoon of that in there. It's really nice flavor for pork. If you don't want all of that, you can do a quarter teaspoon of dried thyme and a quarter teaspoon of dried sage, and that'll do the trick as well. Okay, stir that up and then put it over the heat, medium-high heat now, and bring it up to a boil while stirring it often, and then reduce it down to a simmer, and then stir it, let it simmer for just a couple of minutes or longer if you want to thicken it more, and then that's it. Taste it, and this is when you can add salt and pepper if you want to. Actually, I'm going to say not exactly. If you're going to be keeping that gravy warm on a back burner for a while or reheating it later or anything like that, don't add the salt now, because if it's staying warm, it's going to keep reducing and you're going to end up with that concentrated salt situation. Now, in the blog post for this recipe, it does tell you what to do if your gravy is too thin or too thick. If it is too thick, you can add more chicken stock or water to that. Taste it first, though. If it is weak in flavor, you probably want to go with the chicken stock. If it is strong and intense, if it's salty at all, then the water will be fine. If you want to thicken it, there are two ways that you can do it. So if it's not thick enough for you, you can either get out a container with a tight-fitting lid and add 2 to 4 tablespoons of flour to there, and then 3 times as much of that unsalted chicken stock or water. Put the lid on, give it a really good shake until it's really well combined, and then pour some of that into the gravy, stir it, let it come to a simmer, see if it's thick enough for you, add a little more if you'd like, and then it's going to thicken as it simmers. Or you can do that beurre manière that I tell you guys about all the time, kneaded butter, where you're mixing together equal parts softened butter and flour, and you kind of mix it into a little dough, and then you dollop that into your gravy. That is great to do if your gravy needs a little more richness, if it doesn't have a robust flavor. Now you're adding richness and you're not diluting with any more liquid. See what I mean? Okay, there is more actually in the blog post for this recipe, so you definitely should head over there. I'm going to stop though, because I am way over the 5 minutes that I claim this podcast is supposed to be. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there, or find it in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/recipeotd. And hey, just a quick note. I'm on a recording hiatus right now, so for the next little while, I'm replaying episodes from the archives, including this one. If you heard me mention a holiday, a season, or something going on in my life that seemed a bit off, that's why. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you're enjoying these older episodes. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, cookfor2.us, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.